Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. Ethan stared at the walkie-talkie in her hands. Its green power light blinked faintly, the same as it always had, but now the device felt foreign, alien, like everything about the woman standing in his workshop. The air was thick with tension as she adjusted the knobs, her glowing eyes scanning the faint signals displayed on the battered unit. Ethan's workshop, usually a haven of comfort, felt claustrophobic under her commanding presence. "Who exactly is coming?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharper this time. "And why my walkie-talkie?" "It's just an old radio. There's nothing special about it." She didn't look up. "Your technology is primitive but adaptable. That's why I chose it. The enemy can't easily intercept signals that are unpredictable. Your device is ideal for sending an untraceable broadcast." Her fingers paused briefly as she glanced over her shoulder at him. "As for who's coming, call them raiders. Harvesters. Parasites. They move from world to world, stripping resources and leaving nothing behind. I was tasked with stopping them before they arrived here, but..." She hesitated, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. "They found me first." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle in the pit of his stomach. "So, what? You're just dragging me into your war. I didn't sign up for this." She turned to face him fully, her star-like eyes softening, just for a moment. "I didn't choose to involve you. But now that you're part of this, your survival depends on helping me. If we fail, your world won't stand a chance." Ethan wanted to argue, to demand answers to the 1,000 questions racing through his mind. But before he could speak, the workshop lights flickered. A low hum, barely audible, vibrated through the air. It wasn't coming from the walkie-talkie. It was deeper, more resonant, like the growl of some enormous, unseen beast. The alien woman froze, her head snapping toward the door. "They're here." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, they're here?" "You said the message would buy us time." "I said it would warn them I'm here," she corrected, her tone clipped. "Time is irrelevant to them." Before Ethan could react, the hum grew louder, evolving into a mechanical whine. The ground beneath his feet trembled. He ran to the window and peered out into the night. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the dark, quiet expanse of his backyard. Then, faint pinpricks of red light appeared in the distance, hovering just above the tree line. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "Drones," she said, her voice tight. "They scan for energy signatures. If they find us, they'll call the others." Ethan turned back to her, panic rising. "The others? You mean more of those things? What do we do?" The woman's gaze swept the room, landing on a steel toolbox in the corner. She strode over, opened it, and rummaged through the contents with an efficiency that suggested she wasn't new to human tools. Pulling out a wrench, she held it up, testing its weight. "We fight." Ethan blinked. "With a wrench? Against drones?" She didn't smile. "I'm not as defenseless as I look." Holding the wrench in one hand, she extended the other toward the walkie-talkie. The air around her palm shimmered, and a faint, bluish glow enveloped the device. It rose off the table, floating toward her like an obedient pet. Ethan staggered back. "What the?" "Stay quiet," she hissed. "And follow my lead." The first drone emerged from the trees, its sleek, insect-like body glinting in the faint moonlight. It moved with eerie precision, scanning the area with a rotating red eye. More followed, their movements synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. Ethan's hands shook as he grabbed a crowbar from the wall. "You've got a plan, right? Please tell me you've got a plan." "Yes," she said, her voice calm. "But you won't like it. Try me. We need to destroy this place." Ethan stared at her, disbelief written across his face. "Destroy it? This is my house. It's all I have. She gave him a hard look. Would you rather lose a house or your life? Because if those drones find the walkie-talkie, this entire area becomes a target for an orbital strike. His blood ran cold. Orbital strike? Are you kidding me? The drones drew closer, their scanning beams cutting through the dark like searchlights. The hum of their engines was deafening now, vibrating the very walls of the workshop. The alien woman didn't wait for his approval. She hurled the wrench with inhuman strength, striking the lead drone squarely in its sensor. The machine sparked and crashed to the ground, twitching like a dying insect. The other drones reacted instantly, their red lights shifting toward the workshop. "Run!" she shouted. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He bolted out the back door, the woman close behind. The sound of splintering wood erupted behind them as the drones opened fire, shredding the workshop in a hail of plasma bolts. They sprinted across the yard, heading for the tree line. Ethan's lungs burned, his legs protesting every step, but the adrenaline kept him moving. Behind them, the drones were relentless, their mechanical whines growing louder. What now? Ethan gasped as they reached the trees. The woman glanced back, her glowing eyes narrowing. We make them lose the signal. How? Ethan demanded. Instead of answering, she stopped abruptly and grabbed his arm. Hold still. Before he could protest, she placed her palm against his chest. The same bluish glow that had surrounded the walkie-talkie now enveloped him. He felt a strange, tingling sensation spread through his body, like static electricity. What are you doing? He asked, his voice shaking. Masking your energy signature, she said. Stay close to me, and they won't be able to track us. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Together, they pressed deeper into the forest, the sound of the drones fading slightly as the trees closed in around them. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Whoever, or whatever, was hunting them wasn't going to stop. And if the alien woman's warnings were true, the worst was yet to come. The forest was alive with the sounds of the chase. The hum of the drones hovered in the air, their searchlights slicing through the canopy like celestial knives. Ethan and the alien woman moved quickly but carefully, weaving through the dense underbrush to avoid detection. Ethan's mind raced as fast as his heart. The events of the past few minutes, her sudden arrival, the strange modifications to his walkie-talkie, and the revelation of a threat far beyond anything he'd ever imagined, played on a loop in his head. What's the plan now? He hissed, his breath misting in the cold night air. The alien woman paused, scanning their surroundings. The signal I sent will disrupt their network for a short time. It should create enough chaos to buy us an opening. An opening for what? To take out their relay. Ethan frowned. Relay? You mean they've got some kind of base? Not a base, she corrected, her glowing eyes narrowing. A signal amplifier. They deploy it to track and coordinate their drones. If we destroy it, they'll lose their ability to communicate in real time. That will give us a chance to escape, and to warn your people. Ethan bit his lip, suppressing a surge of frustration. You make it sound so simple. How are we supposed to take out something like that? With your glowing hands and my crowbar? The woman gave him a sidelong glance. You underestimate what I'm capable of. Before Ethan could respond, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. A drone passed overhead, its red scanner beam sweeping dangerously close to their position. Down, she whispered sharply, pulling him to the ground. The beam lingered for a moment, illuminating the area just a few feet from where they crouched. Ethan held his breath, his fingers gripping the damp earth. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, the drone moved on, its whine fading into the distance. Ethan exhaled shakily. This is insane. I'm just a guy with a quiet life and a couple of gadgets. I'm not cut out for, whatever this is. The woman rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her silvery skin. And yet, here you are. The universe doesn't wait for anyone to feel ready. You're involved now, whether you like it or not. Ethan groaned but didn't argue. Fine. Where's this relay? She pointed toward a distant ridge, barely visible through the trees. There. The drones deploy it as close to their target as possible without being detected. Judging by the signal strength, it's no more than a mile from here. Ethan glanced at the ridge, then back at her. And once we get there, we improvise, she said simply. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Of course we do. They moved in silence, the forest around them growing darker and denser as they approached the ridge. Ethan's boots crunched softly against fallen leaves, every sound amplified by the oppressive stillness. As they climbed, the alien woman's demeanor shifted. Her movements became more deliberate, her glowing eyes scanning every shadow. Ethan noticed the way she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at him, surprised. "Why does it matter?" "Because if I'm risking my life with you, I'd at least like to know what to call you." There was a brief pause before she replied. "Sarah." Ethan nodded. "Okay, Sarah. I'm Ethan." "I know," she said, her tone unreadable. Ethan frowned but decided not to press her on how she knew his name. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, his mind grappling with the surreal reality of his situation. When they finally reached the ridge, Sarah motioned for Ethan to stay low. They crawled to the edge, where the trees gave way to a rocky clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a towering structure, sleek and alien in design. It pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic glow, its surface shifting like liquid metal. "That's it?" Ethan whispered. Sarah nodded. The relay. It was guarded by 3 drones, their red scanner beams crisscrossing the area. Unlike the smaller drones they'd encountered earlier, these were larger, bulkier, and bristling with weaponry. Ethan's stomach sank. "You've got a plan for taking that thing out, right?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She studied the relay and its guards, her expression calculating. The relay has a central core, its most vulnerable point. If we can overload it, the resulting energy surge will destroy the entire structure. "And the drones?" "I'll handle them," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" She smirked faintly. "I said you underestimate me. Watch and learn." Before Ethan could protest, Sarah stepped into the clearing, her silvery form glinting faintly in the moonlight. She raised her hands, and the air around her shimmered with blue light. The drones immediately turned toward her, their red sensors locking on. Ethan tensed as the first drone fired, a searing bolt of energy streaking toward Sarah. But she moved with impossible speed, dodging the attack and retaliating with a burst of energy from her palms. The blue bolt struck the drone, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. The other 2 drones opened fire, their plasma bolts tearing through the air. Sarah dodged and weaved, her movements a blur of grace and precision. With each strike, she dismantled the machines with surgical efficiency. Ethan watched in awe, gripping his crowbar uselessly. He felt entirely out of his depth, a spectator in a battle far beyond his comprehension. Within moments, all 3 drones lay in smoking ruins. Sarah turned back to Ethan, her glowing eyes fierce. "The path is clear. Let's move." They approached the relay cautiously. Up close, the structure was even more intimidating, its pulsing glow casting eerie shadows across the clearing. Sarah placed a hand on its surface, her expression focused. "I can override the core's defenses," she said. "But it'll take time. You'll need to cover me in case reinforcements arrive." Ethan swallowed hard. "Great. No pressure." Sarah began working, her hands glowing as she manipulated the relay's shifting surface. Ethan stood guard, his crowbar feeling increasingly inadequate as he scanned the darkness for signs of movement. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, just as Sarah muttered, "Almost there," the hum returned. Ethan turned to see a new wave of drones descending from the sky. These were smaller than the guards but faster, their red lights flickering like angry fireflies. "They're coming!" Ethan shouted. Sarah didn't look up. "Keep them busy. I just need 30 seconds. Ethan gritted his teeth. 30 seconds. Got it. He charged toward the oncoming drones, swinging his crowbar wildly. To his surprise, he managed to knock one out of the air, its delicate frame crumpling on impact. "Not bad for a guy with a crowbar," he muttered to himself, a flicker of confidence igniting. The drones swarmed him, their movements chaotic and relentless. He fought with every ounce of strength he had, dodging their attacks and striking whenever he saw an opening. Behind him, Sarah's voice rang out. "It's done. Get back." Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward her as the relay began to pulse violently, its glow intensifying. "Down!" Sarah shouted, pulling him to the ground just as the relay exploded in a blinding burst of light. The shockwave tore through the clearing, obliterating the remaining drones and leaving behind a smoldering crater. Ethan lay on the ground, panting, his ears ringing. "Is it over?" Sarah sat up, her expression unreadable. "For now. But they'll send more." Ethan groaned. "Of course they will." As the night settled into uneasy silence, Ethan realized that his quiet life was over, and that this was only the beginning. Ethan's head throbbed as he sat up, the remnants of the relay's explosion still ringing in his ears. His body felt heavy, drained from the adrenaline rush of the past few minutes, but his mind was sharp. He looked around the clearing, where the smoldering remains of the relay still sent plumes of smoke into the night air. The drones were gone, obliterated by the blast, but the stillness felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Sarah was already on her feet, brushing dirt from her silvery skin as she surveyed the area. Her glowing eyes flickered with something akin to satisfaction, though her expression remained impassive. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "Right?" She nodded, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "For now. But the hunter knows we're here." Ethan blinked. "The hunter? You mean?" "The one who tracks me," Sarah interrupted. "He's not like the drones. He's different. More dangerous." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Great. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her stance becoming more defensive. "The hunter is relentless. He'll come for us, no matter what." "Then why don't we just leave?" Ethan suggested, glancing nervously at the forest behind them. "We can keep running. You can still cover our tracks, right?" She shook her head. "The hunter doesn't care about tracks. He doesn't need to follow us." She turned to face him, her eyes darkening. "He can feel my presence. And once he's locked onto a target, he doesn't stop." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "So, we're just dead men walking?" "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Not if we're careful." Ethan swallowed hard. He couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. He had never been involved in anything like this, and every step seemed to lead them deeper into a world he didn't understand, one filled with aliens, threats, and powers beyond comprehension. Sarah's expression softened for a moment. "We need to keep moving. The hunter will be here soon, and we can't outrun him if we don't work together." Ethan looked at her, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "You really think we can stop him?" She gave him a cold, calculating look. "We don't need to stop him. We need to survive long enough to find a way to defeat him. And that means finding cover." Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right. Lead the way." They began moving through the forest again, but this time, there was no more banter between them. Every step felt heavier, more deliberate, as if the air itself was thick with the threat of what was coming. The quiet night felt like a ticking clock counting down to an inevitable confrontation. Hours passed as they trekked through the dense woods, their surroundings becoming increasingly unfamiliar. The path they followed seemed to twist and turn in unnatural ways, as if the forest itself was shifting. Ethan's legs burned from the exertion, but he forced himself to keep moving. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Finally, Sarah came to a halt, raising a hand. Ethan, who had been lost in thought, nearly bumped into her. "Here," she said softly. "We need to hide." Ethan looked around. They were in a small clearing, surrounded by thick trees. There was no sign of an obvious shelter or place to hide. Just more trees, more underbrush, and more shadows. Sarah knelt, brushing aside a few vines and revealing a narrow, hidden entrance to a small cave. "This will work," she said, motioning for him to follow. Ethan hesitated. He didn't like the idea of being cooped up in a tiny space while an alien hunter was hunting them, but he didn't argue. He crawled into the cave behind her, the cool, damp air enveloping them as they huddled in the darkness. Sarah immediately began to work, her glowing eyes scanning the walls of the cave for something, but Ethan couldn't see what she was doing. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she extended one hand, and a soft, blue light began to glow around her palm. She waved her hand through the air, as if tracing something invisible. Then, she muttered a few words in that strange, alien language. The walls of the cave seemed to shimmer for a brief moment, and then the light flickered out. Ethan blinked. "What was that?" "A cloaking field," she replied, her voice calm but focused. "It'll hide us from the hunter. For now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "And how long will it work?" Sarah's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Long enough for us to catch our breath. But it won't last forever. The hunter is persistent." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "That's comforting." He settled against the cold stone wall, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. He wanted to ask her more about the hunter, what he was, why he was chasing them, but he knew better than to push. Sarah had her own way of dealing with things. She was the expert. And Ethan? He was just along for the ride. Minutes turned to hours, and still, there was no sign of the hunter. The cave remained eerily silent, save for the sound of their breathing. But the longer they stayed hidden, the more Ethan felt the weight of their situation. The hunter was out there. And sooner or later, he would find them. "Tell me about him," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "The hunter. Who is he?" Sarah's gaze flickered toward him, but she didn't speak right away. For a moment, Ethan thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, her voice broke the silence, low and distant. "He's a relentless tracker, the best of his kind. He's never failed to catch his prey. And he's not just some mindless killer. He's methodical. He studies his targets, learns everything about them. He's an expert in psychological warfare." Ethan's stomach churned. "So, he's not just hunting you. He's playing with you." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes. He'll try to wear us down, break our resolve. He'll make us doubt ourselves, make us second-guess every move we make." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "How do we stop him?" "We don't," she replied quietly. "Not directly. We survive. We outlast him." Ethan looked at her in disbelief. "Survive? That's it?" "For now," she said. "And when the time comes, we'll have our chance to strike back." Ethan leaned back against the wall, frustration building inside him. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a fighter. He had no idea how to deal with this alien hunter. He wasn't even sure how he had ended up here, fighting for his life in the middle of a war he didn't understand. But as he sat in the dark, listening to the sound of his own breath, a part of him realized Sarah was right. There was no quick fix. No simple solution. They had to survive, plain and simple. He wasn't sure how long they stayed there in the cave, time feeling warped in the oppressive quiet, but eventually, the sound of something, distant, mechanical, like a low hum, cut through the stillness. Sarah's eyes snapped open. "He's close," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "Get ready." Ethan's heart lurched as he scrambled to his feet. They were out of time. The hunter was closing in. And now, the real fight for survival was about to begin. The hunter was close. Ethan's heart raced as he scrambled to his feet, his hands trembling despite his efforts to steady them. The cave was suddenly too small, too suffocating. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on them. It was a different kind of fear now, one that wasn't based on uncertainty, but on the reality of the threat they faced. The hunter was coming. And when he arrived, there would be no place for either of them to hide. Sarah's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, her face unreadable. She moved with a fluid grace, already preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Ethan felt like a bystander, caught in the wake of her certainty. She was the expert. She knew what was coming. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice tight. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand to the air, as if feeling the vibrations, tuning into the pulse of the forest around them. Her eyes flickered, then locked onto him. "He's already scanning the area," she said quietly. "He's looking for any sign of us." Ethan swallowed. "What does he do once he finds us?" Sarah's lips curled into a grim smile. "He takes his time. He doesn't rush. But when he has you, there's no escape." Ethan shivered, his mind racing as he thought about all the ways this could go wrong. "We need to run. We can't stay here." "Running won't help," Sarah replied calmly. "Not from him. We need to stay low, stay hidden, and wait for him to make his move. He's a hunter. He'll never reveal himself unless he knows he has us." "But we can't just," Ethan began, but Sarah held up a hand, silencing him. "Quiet," she said sharply, her eyes scanning the entrance to the cave. "He's here." Ethan froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The hum was louder now, impossibly close. A sudden, eerie stillness settled over the forest, and Ethan instinctively crouched lower, blending into the shadows of the cave. Sarah's glowing eyes were the only thing visible in the darkness. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a crackling sound broke the stillness, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against rock. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized the hunter was searching the area, methodically, with ruthless precision. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them offered a solution. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out of there, but the reality of the situation was too clear. There was nowhere to run. Not from something like this. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close, echoed from outside the cave. The hunter was searching. And he was getting closer. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at Sarah, who had lowered herself to the ground, her posture tense but composed. She wasn't afraid. But the cold reality in her eyes told him that even she didn't know if they would make it out of this alive. The footsteps stopped. Ethan's pulse drummed in his ears as he strained to hear the next sound, the next move, anything that might give them a clue as to where the hunter was. Then came the voice. It was a low, guttural growl, almost a purr, but filled with a deadly edge. "I know you're here, Sarah," the voice said, the words laced with an alien cadence that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "You can't hide from me. You can't outrun me." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know how the hunter could possibly know they were there. They were cloaked, hidden. But then he remembered, Sarah had said the hunter didn't need to track physical footprints. He could sense her presence. "Where are you?" the hunter continued, his voice dripping with malice. "I can feel you." Ethan's hand instinctively went to the crowbar at his side, but he knew it was useless. Against a hunter like this, it was just a piece of metal. Sarah didn't move, didn't even flinch. She kept her eyes trained on the entrance, her expression calm but focused. "This is pointless," the hunter said, almost as if speaking to himself. "I will find you, no matter how many tricks you try. You're out of time." The air seemed to hum with a strange energy, an electric tension building in the silence. Ethan could almost feel the weight of the hunter's presence, like the air had thickened, becoming dense with predatory intent. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. If they didn't make a move soon, they would be trapped. The cloaking field was their only chance, but even that wasn't a guarantee. The hunter had already proven he could sense them. "I'm coming for you," the hunter's voice purred again, colder this time. "I always do." Without warning, the ground beneath them seemed to shake. The entrance to the cave glowed with an unnatural light, and for a moment, Ethan thought the hunter had activated some kind of weapon, a trap, or worse. But it wasn't a weapon. It was worse than that. A massive form, cloaked in shadow, appeared at the entrance of the cave. Ethan couldn't see the hunter's face, but the shape of him was unmistakable. Tall, hulking, with elongated limbs that seemed almost inhuman. His body was covered in strange, armored plating, and his eyes that glowed faintly, pierced through the darkness. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the hunter's gaze even from this distance. Every fiber of his being screamed to run, to hide, but he knew there was nowhere to go. The hunter stood there for a moment, his silhouette framed by the entrance. His head tilted slightly, as if savoring the moment before the hunt began. Then, without a word, he stepped into the cave. Ethan froze. It was over. The game was up. He could feel it in his gut. The hunter knew. Sarah had been right all along. "You've made a mistake, Hunter," Sarah said suddenly, her voice calm, but filled with an authority that cut through the tension like a blade. "I'm not your prey." The hunter didn't move, didn't flinch. But there was something in the air now, a palpable change. A shift. As if the game had just begun. "You think you can outsmart me," the hunter growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You can't." But Sarah was already moving, her figure blurring as she shot forward with incredible speed, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Ethan barely had time to react. She was a force of nature, unpredictable, lethal, and faster than anything he had ever seen. She moved with precision, her glowing hands raised, energy crackling around her. The hunter lashed out, his claws extending as if to catch her. But Sarah was already behind him, her body a blur as she struck with force, her energy slamming into the hunter's back, sending him crashing into the cave wall. The force of the impact shook the ground beneath them, sending a spray of dust into the air. The hunter snarled in rage, whipping around, but Sarah was already back on the move. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold, his mind unable to keep up with the speed and ferocity of the fight. Sarah was holding her own, barely, but the hunter was relentless. This wasn't just a fight. It was a war of wills, a battle between predator and prey. And right now, it was anyone's game. The air crackled with tension as Sarah and the hunter collided once again, their movements blurring into a chaotic dance of violence and speed. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before the ground beneath him shook with each strike. The hunter was massive, an imposing force of nature, while Sarah moved like a shadow, quick and fluid, always one step ahead, at least for now. Ethan's breath was shallow, his chest tight with fear. He wanted to help, wanted to do something, anything, but he was frozen in place. His mind screamed at him to do something useful, but his body wouldn't obey. The battle between the two aliens was something far beyond anything he could comprehend, a clash of forces too powerful for his mortal frame. Sarah ducked under the hunter's massive claw, rolling to the side and launching herself at his exposed flank. She slammed into him with the force of a freight train, her glowing hands channeling strange energy that sent a shockwave through the cave. The hunter grunted in pain, but his retaliatory strike was immediate. He whirled around, his long limbs catching Sarah off guard and sending her crashing into the rocky wall. Ethan's eyes widened in panic. He could see the impact take a toll on Sarah. She staggered to her feet, her movement slower now, as if the fight was beginning to wear her down. Her glowing eyes flickered, dimming for just a moment, but it was enough for the hunter to press his advantage. "Sarah!" Ethan shouted, his voice raw with desperation. He was powerless to stop this, trapped in a situation where the odds were so heavily stacked against them that even a glimmer of hope seemed impossible. Sarah turned her head, catching his gaze for a fraction of a second. There was an emotion in her eyes that he couldn't quite place, resignation, maybe, but also something else. It was a look that seemed to say, "We will not survive this." But then, in that fleeting moment of vulnerability, something else happened. The hunter lunged at Sarah, his claws extended, his massive form lunging forward like a tidal wave. He was quick, too quick. But Sarah, with a sharp breath, pivoted on her heel. She ducked under his outstretched arm, and before the hunter could adjust, she slammed both her hands against the side of his skull. The sound of the impact reverberated through the cave, a sickening crack that made Ethan wince. The hunter staggered, his head snapping to the side, but he didn't go down. No, the hunter was relentless. His glowing eyes, filled with fury, locked onto Sarah with renewed purpose. Sarah staggered backward, taking a deep breath as she prepared herself for the next move. Her energy was beginning to wane, her movement slower than before. Ethan could see it, could see how close she was to giving everything she had. And that's when it happened. A blinding flash of light erupted from Sarah's hands as she sent a final, desperate blast of energy into the hunter. The sheer force of the explosion threw Ethan off his feet, the cave shaking violently as if the very earth was rebelling against the chaos. Dust and debris flew through the air, obscuring the combatants. When the light faded and the dust settled, Ethan's heart stopped. The hunter was gone. The cave was silent. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. What had happened? Was it over? Was the hunter dead? "Sarah," he shouted, pushing past the remnants of the debris and rushing toward her. She was on her knees, panting heavily, her glowing eyes flickering weakly. She didn't move when he reached her, her body slumped against the cave wall. "Sarah?" Ethan's voice cracked as he knelt beside her. She looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "He's not gone," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He'll be back. Soon." Ethan's stomach dropped as he realized the truth of her words. He could still feel the presence of the hunter, like an oppressive weight in the air. There was no escaping this. No winning. "Then what do we do?" Ethan asked, panic starting to rise in his chest. His hands shook as he tried to help her to her feet, but she was too weak to stand. "We fight," Sarah replied, her voice cold, resigned. "But not here. Not now. We don't have the strength." "What are you talking about?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. "You almost took him down. If you can." Sarah cut him off with a raised hand. "No. Almost isn't enough. Not for him." She looked around, her eyes darting over the cave. "There's no way we can win if we keep fighting him here. It's too close. Too vulnerable." Ethan's mind raced. He understood now. They had to escape. They had to get away and regroup, or they were both dead. But how? Sarah, despite her exhaustion, stood up with a visible struggle, using the rock wall for support. She glanced at the entrance, as if gauging the situation, and then turned back to Ethan. "You're right," she said, her voice steady once more. "We need to leave." "Leave?" Ethan echoed, baffled. "Where?" "The hunter." "I know a place," Sarah interrupted, cutting him off. "A safe place. A last resort." Ethan frowned. "How do you know it's safe?" "The hunter will find us." "The hunter won't find us there," Sarah replied. Her tone was final. "But we have to move now. He's not far. We've delayed him, but not for long. We're out of time." Ethan opened his mouth to protest but then stopped himself. He didn't know what else to say. He knew she was right. The hunter would be back, and they couldn't afford another round of this fight. Not now. Not like this. He nodded. "All right. Lead the way." Sarah staggered forward, her energy flickering, but there was something else in her eyes, a burning determination, a resolve to survive at any cost. Ethan followed her, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. They had no choice but to keep moving, to push forward into the unknown. As they exited the cave, the air felt colder, the trees whispering around them like distant voices. The sounds of the forest seemed muted now, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. They moved quickly, Sarah's pace steady despite her weariness. Ethan's own legs were sore from the constant sprinting, but he didn't dare slow down. Not now. The forest stretched out before them, endless and daunting. There was no sign of the hunter, but Ethan could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise, a nagging sense of being watched, hunted. "How far?" Ethan asked after a few minutes of running. "Not far," Sarah replied without looking back. "We're almost there." Ethan swallowed, pushing his fears aside. Whatever this safe place was, it had to be their last hope. The hunter was relentless, but they had no other choice but to trust in Sarah's instincts. The trees began to thin, and through the dense foliage, Ethan could see a distant outline of something man-made. He didn't know what it was, but it was their only chance. They were almost there. The final stand had only just begun. The thrum of their footsteps echoed in Ethan's mind as they pushed through the dense underbrush, the trees stretching tall above them like silent sentinels. Despite the urgency of their situation, the forest felt almost eerily calm. The wind had died down, leaving only the rustling of leaves beneath their feet and the distant sounds of wildlife. Yet, Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. The hunter was still out there, lurking somewhere in the shadows, and he wouldn't stop until he found them. Sarah moved ahead, her steps purposeful and steady, though Ethan could see the strain in her movements. Her usual fluidity had slowed, her energy depleted from the brutal fight they just barely survived. Every so often, her glowing eyes dimmed, only to flare back to life as she pushed forward. But despite her exhaustion, there was a fire in her, a sense of resolve that told Ethan she was determined to see this through to the end. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe for her. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. And as much as he wished he could help, he knew he was powerless in this situation. He was just a man, fragile, human, and helpless against the forces at play. Still, he pressed on, keeping a tight grip on the crowbar slung at his side, his mind constantly racing. They were heading toward some kind of sanctuary, a hidden place where they could regroup and plan. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the hunter already knew where they were going? The uncertainty gnawed at him. And yet, he couldn't let it consume him. They had no choice but to keep moving. As the forest began to thin, the landscape ahead opened into a rocky plateau, the ground uneven and harsh. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he looked around, the air growing colder, sharper. The trees were still there, but their presence was less comforting now. The plateau had a strange, almost unnatural feel to it, like it was meant to be hidden from view, tucked away from the world. And then he saw it. In the distance, Tucked against the base of a rocky cliff, stood a small structure, barely noticeable at first glance, blending seamlessly into the landscape. The walls of the building were made from jagged stone, weathered and aged, but sturdy. Vines and moss clung to the stone like a protective shroud, further obscuring it from prying eyes. The building seemed almost like part of the mountain itself, as if it had been there for centuries, forgotten by time. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The sanctuary. Is this where we're going? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her face grim but resolute. Yes. We'll be safe here, for now. They quickened their pace, moving with purpose toward the structure. The closer they got, the more Ethan could make out of the hidden entrance, a small, arching doorway carved into the rock, partially obscured by overgrown ivy. The air around the structure felt different, heavier, as if the place had its own energy, its own presence. Ethan wasn't sure what it was, but something told him that this was no ordinary shelter. When they reached the entrance, Sarah hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. Ethan followed close behind, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if expecting the hunter to appear at any moment. Inside, the sanctuary was darker than he expected, the light filtering in through cracks in the stone and the vines that clung to the walls. The air was cool, but there was a certain stillness to it, an oppressive silence that made Ethan's skin crawl. The walls of the chamber were lined with strange markings, carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the low light, as if they were alive. The space was small, but not uncomfortable. It felt safe, in a way. But also ancient, like something lost to time. Sarah moved toward the center of the room, her steps deliberate, as if she had done this before. Ethan followed her, his gaze shifting between the intricate symbols etched into the walls and the shadows that seemed to pulse with life. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know about it?" Sarah didn't immediately answer. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, and then spoke, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "This is a sanctuary, hidden away from the hunter and his kind," she said, her eyes flickering with a strange light. "It's not just a place of refuge, it's a place of power. A place where the hunter's tracking abilities won't work." Ethan frowned, his confusion deepening. "How does that make sense? What kind of power are we talking about?" Sarah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "The markings on the walls are ancient. This place was built by my people, my kind. It's a refuge designed to shield us from the hunter's senses. But it's also something more. It's a repository of knowledge. Knowledge we can use to fight back." Ethan's mind raced as he processed her words. This place was more than just a safe house, it was something far more important. But what kind of knowledge could it hold? And how did it fit into the larger war between her people and the hunter? "You said your people built this. Who are your people?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Sarah hesitated. "It's a long story. But suffice it to say that I'm not from this world. I'm part of a race that was nearly wiped out by the hunter and his kind. The hunter is the last of his species, and he's been hunting us for millennia." Ethan's heart sank as the weight of her words hit him. He had suspected as much, that Sarah wasn't human, but hearing it confirmed was something entirely different. She wasn't just a survivor of some unknown conflict, she was a refugee from a war that spanned generations. The implications were staggering. "What happened to your people?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sarah's gaze turned distant, haunted by memories of a past she could never fully escape. "We were nearly exterminated. The hunter species was relentless in their pursuit of us. Our kind fought back, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, we were driven to the brink of extinction. Some of us escaped, scattered across different worlds. But the hunter always finds us. Always." Ethan could hear the pain in her voice, the bitterness of loss that clung to every word. It was a wound that would never heal, no matter how far they ran. And now he's hunting you, Ethan said, a cold realization settling in his chest. Why? Why come after you now? Sarah's eyes narrowed as she looked at him. The war isn't over. The hunter has always been driven by a need to destroy, to be the last of his kind. He comes after us because we're the last remnants of a species that nearly defeated his own. Ethan swallowed, the weight of her words settling in. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to keep a part of history alive. A history that the hunter was determined to erase. The room seemed to grow colder as the silence between them stretched on. Then, Sarah spoke again, her voice firm with resolve. We can't hide forever. The hunter will come here eventually. But this place gives us a chance. A fighting chance. Ethan nodded, a renewed sense of purpose rising within him. Then let's make it count. Sarah gave him a sharp look. We don't have much time. We need to unlock the power of this place, use it to stop him. But first, we need to understand it. Ethan followed her gaze to the symbols on the walls. He didn't know how they would do it, how they would fight back against the hunter and his relentless pursuit. But one thing was clear, they weren't alone. Not anymore. The hunter would come. But they would be ready. The silence in the sanctuary felt heavier than ever as Ethan and Sarah stood amidst the ancient carvings, their thoughts racing. The air in the room had grown colder, almost like it was reacting to their presence. Despite the sanctuary's supposed protection, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, like they were not truly alone. Sarah, however, seemed more focused than ever. Her eyes moved slowly across the walls, her gaze lingering on each glowing symbol, as if deciphering a language only she understood. Ethan could sense her frustration, the way her brow furrowed as she traced a finger across the ancient markings. We're running out of time, she muttered, barely audible. The hunter won't stop. Not until we're both dead. Ethan's heart clenched at her words. He knew she was right, the relentless alien hunter would track them down eventually, and the sanctuary would only offer temporary safety. The hunter had never failed to find his prey before, and there was no reason to believe he would fail now. He stepped closer, studying the markings on the walls. The symbols shimmered with a strange, otherworldly glow, each one distinct but interconnected, like a web of knowledge that stretched across time and space. The carvings weren't just decorations, they were a form of language, a history written into the very stone. What exactly are we looking for? Ethan asked, his voice low. What's the plan? Sarah didn't immediately respond. Instead, she continued to study the symbols, her brow furrowing deeper as she scanned each one. She seemed to be trying to piece together something from the fragmented patterns, as if some hidden meaning lay just beyond her grasp. I've seen these markings before, she finally said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Not all of them, but enough to know they're part of a larger map. A map of power. A map? Ethan asked, confused. A map to what? Sarah's gaze shifted toward the far wall, where a particularly intricate set of symbols stood out. They were arranged in a pattern that looked almost like a celestial chart, a representation of stars or perhaps planets, connected by glowing lines that pulsed faintly as if alive. It was beautiful, yet unsettling, like the workings of a machine beyond comprehension. A map to the source, she murmured. The source of their power, their energy. The key to defeating the hunter. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized the significance of what she was saying. This place. The sanctuary wasn't just a hiding place, it was a doorway to something far more important. Something that could change the course of their battle with the hunter. The source of energy? Ethan asked, trying to keep up. You mean, there's a weapon or something here? Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on the glowing symbols. Not a weapon, an ancient power. My people, long before the hunter species hunted us to extinction, discovered a way to harness the energy of the universe itself. They created sanctuaries like this one, places where they could tap into that power, use it to fight back. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The one thing that might actually give them a chance against the hunter. But if Sarah's people had discovered this power, why hadn't they been able to stop the hunter before? Then why didn't it work? Ethan asked, his voice sharp. If they had this power, why didn't they defeat the hunter's kind before? Sarah's expression darkened as she turned to face him, her eyes filled with sorrow. Because the power they tapped into was unstable. Dangerous. It was a force that could destroy everything, including the very fabric of the universe. My people, they thought they could control it. But they were wrong. In their pursuit of victory, they overextended themselves, and the energy they harnessed became a curse rather than a blessing. Ethan's mind reeled. The idea of using such power, something that could reshape the very fabric of existence, was terrifying. He could only imagine the kind of destruction it could cause. But at the same time, it was their only hope. So, how do we stop the hunter with this power? Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. What do we need to do? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as if preparing for something monumental. Then, without a word, she turned back to the wall, her fingers moving over the symbols with reverence, tracing a path that Ethan couldn't quite follow. There was a rhythm to her touch, a quiet confidence that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, even though she'd never been here before. This room, she said finally, her voice tinged with exhaustion, contains the key to unlocking the power. But we need to focus. We need to complete the map. Ethan stepped closer, peering over her shoulder at the glowing symbols. They were shifting before his eyes, the lines of energy flickering and pulsating, like stars rearranging themselves in a distant galaxy. The closer he looked, the more he felt a strange connection to the patterns, as though the energy within the sanctuary was calling to him, beckoning him to understand it. You think this map will lead us to the source? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. Yes. But it's not just a physical location we need to find. The source isn't a place, it's a state of being. A way of understanding the universe. Ethan frowned. This was beginning to sound more and more like something out of a myth, a fantasy beyond anything he could grasp. But the urgency in Sarah's voice, the conviction in her every movement, made him want to believe. They didn't have any other choice, after all. She pressed her hand to the wall, and the symbols around her began to glow brighter, their light intensifying until the room was filled with an ethereal glow. The air around them hummed with energy, vibrating with a power that made Ethan's skin tingle. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed as she whispered something in a language Ethan didn't recognize. The words were soft, almost melodic, but there was a weight to them, as though each syllable held immense power. As she spoke, the symbols on the walls began to shift and rotate, realigning themselves into new patterns. The map was coming to life. Ethan could feel the tension building in the air, the very stone beneath his feet humming with energy. He didn't know what was happening, but he could sense that they were on the verge of something monumental. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The symbols on the walls fell silent, their glow dimming to a faint pulse. The room seemed to exhale, as though the energy that had been building inside had reached its peak and dissipated. Sarah opened her eyes, her face pale, her breathing shallow. It's done, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The map is complete. Ethan looked at the wall, his eyes wide as he saw the final pattern settle into place. The glowing lines now formed a series of interconnected paths, each one leading to a specific point on the map. It was like a web, a network of energy that stretched across the universe, and at its center. The source, Ethan breathed, realizing what they had to do. Sarah nodded slowly. We need to find the center. That's where the power lies. And that's where we'll have our chance to stop the hunter. Ethan felt a surge of determination. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time since they had entered the sanctuary, he felt a sense of purpose. The hunter was coming, but now they had a weapon, a chance to fight back. And they were going to take it. "We'll do it," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll stop him. We have to." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes hard with resolve. "We don't have a choice. We fight. Or we die." Ethan nodded. "Then let's make it count." They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future. And now, they had a way to win. The sanctuary trembled as the map's final symbol burned into the stone, its glow so bright that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. Ethan and Sarah stood side by side, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a tangible force. They now had a destination, a path to the source of power that could finally put an end to the hunter's relentless pursuit. But the question remained, would they reach it in time? The air inside the sanctuary grew heavy, charged with a strange, buzzing energy. Sarah's face was tight with determination, though Ethan could see the exhaustion etched into her features. She had given so much already, but the fight was far from over. "The map points to a nexus point," Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent. "It's not far from here, on the other side of the mountain range. That's where the source is hidden." Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar that had somehow become his weapon of choice. He wasn't a soldier, but he'd fight if he had to. "How long do we have before the hunter finds us?" Sarah's glowing eyes flickered briefly, a sign of her own uncertainty. "Not long. The sanctuary has masked us for now, but the map's activation may have sent out a signal. He'll sense it." Ethan's chest tightened at the thought. They were running on borrowed time, every second a gamble. But there was no turning back now. "Then let's move." The two stepped out of the sanctuary and into the cold night air. The forest around them seemed quieter than before, the usual hum of insects and rustling leaves replaced by an eerie stillness. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to stay hidden, but Sarah pushed forward, her determination unwavering. The journey was grueling. They scaled rocky inclines and wove through dense undergrowth, every step bringing them closer to the nexus point. Sarah's alien physiology allowed her to push through with an efficiency Ethan couldn't hope to match, but she slowed her pace to accommodate him, her glowing eyes constantly scanning for signs of danger. As they climbed higher, the forest gave way to a barren, windswept plateau. The wind howled around them, carrying with it a sharp chill that bit into their skin. Ethan squinted against the cold, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. And then, as they crested a ridge, he saw it. The nexus. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. A massive, crystalline structure jutted out from the ground, its surface glowing with an ethereal light. The crystals pulsed rhythmically, as if alive, their glow casting long shadows across the barren landscape. At the center of the formation was a swirling vortex of energy, a maelstrom of light and motion that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. "That's it," Sarah said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "The source." Ethan felt a surge of both hope and trepidation. The nexus was beautiful, but its power was almost overwhelming. If this was what they were up against, how could they hope to control it? But there was no time to dwell on the question. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the air, sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. He turned to see a dark figure emerging from the shadows, its form massive and menacing. The hunter. The alien creature moved with terrifying grace, its sleek, armored body glinting in the light of the nexus. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and Ethan felt a primal fear grip him. The hunter was here, and it was ready to end this. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and the hunter. Her energy flared, her eyes glowing brighter than ever as she prepared for the fight of her life. "Ethan," she said without looking back, "you need to get to the nexus. Activate it. I'll hold him off." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "You can't take him alone." "I don't have a choice." Sarah snapped, her voice sharp but not unkind. This is our only chance. Go. Ethan hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to help and knowing he was outmatched. Finally, he nodded, his jaw set with determination. Don't die on me. Without waiting for a response, he turned and sprinted toward the Nexus, his legs burning as he pushed himself to his limit. Behind him, he could hear the clash of energy as Sarah engaged the hunter, her alien power crackling like thunder in the cold night air. As he reached the base of the crystalline structure, Ethan could feel its energy vibrating through the ground. The air around the Nexus was electric, alive with a power that seemed to resonate with his very soul. He placed his hands on the crystal, and a surge of energy shot through him, making him gasp. Images flooded his mind, visions of Sarah's people, their struggle against the hunter's kind, and the devastating power of the Nexus. He saw entire worlds consumed by its energy, the fabric of reality bending and twisting under its influence. But amidst the chaos, he saw hope. The Nexus wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool, a means to protect and preserve life if wielded correctly. Come on, he muttered, his voice trembling. Show me how to stop him. The Nexus seemed to respond to his plea. The crystals around him glowed brighter, their light forming patterns that coalesced into a single, brilliant point. Ethan reached for it, feeling the energy flow into him, filling him with a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Behind him, the battle raged on. Sarah was holding her own against the hunter, her movements a blur of speed and precision. But she was tiring, her energy waning as the hunter pressed his relentless assault. Ethan knew she couldn't hold out much longer. With a final surge of determination, he focused on the energy within the Nexus. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but he trusted his instincts, letting the power guide him. The crystals pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and the air around him grew impossibly bright. And then, with a sound like the breaking of 1,000 thunderclaps, the Nexus unleashed its power. A wave of energy rippled outward, slamming into the hunter with the force of a tidal wave. The alien creature roared in pain, its body writhing as the energy consumed it. Sarah stumbled back, shielding her eyes from the blinding light. When the brilliance faded, the hunter was gone. Ethan collapsed to his knees, the exhaustion of the moment finally catching up to him. He felt Sarah's hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him as the energy of the Nexus settled into a quiet hum. It's over, she said softly, her voice filled with both relief and sadness. Ethan looked up at her, his face pale but resolute. Is it? The hunter's gone, but the Nexus, this power, it's too dangerous. What if someone else finds it? Sarah nodded, understanding his concern. We'll seal it. Hide it where no one can reach it again. Together, they worked to deactivate the Nexus, its light dimming until it was nothing more than a faint glow beneath the earth. The sanctuary would remain, but its secrets would be buried, a legacy of a battle fought and won. As they walked away from the Nexus, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Ethan felt a strange sense of peace, knowing they had done what needed to be done. The hunter was gone, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. We did it, he said, his voice quiet but filled with hope. Sarah smiled faintly, her glowing eyes softening. We did. And now we move forward. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, they had a chance. A chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find a future worth fighting for. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.